Mr. Malice, I'm trying to get a read on you about where you stand on this coronavirus. First of all, you're like a libertarian guy. Is that what
I'm an anarchist? Yeah.
An anarchist. So, what would your plan be to navigate this current situation?
I would imagine it's every man for himself.
What would you do?
You don't have to imagine. I can tell you. I'm right here.
Now you don't mind. You don't mind if we talk while you're talking, do we?
I'm also a New Yorker, so I would absolutely insist upon it because that will tell me we're back to normal.
You're not a total anarchist, are you? Go ahead.
No, I think any kind of ideology kind of falls by the wayside when you're dealing with a crisis. And you're seeing that every country internationally, whether it's South Korea or China, Sweden, Italy, Spain, Brazil, the U.S., and different states within the U.S., they each have different approaches. And it becomes a matter of what works and what doesn't. I think a lot of these things that are the law, these lockdowns, some of them, aren't really being enforced legally. It's just being enforced socially. And that is kind of the basis of what's going on here. I would just point out that I think it is, and this is really being an anarchist speaking, a lot of people are trained since they're very young to not understand or pretend not to understand the concept of trade-offs. And, Chris Christie recently got in trouble at CNN because he had said, no matter when we open, people are going to die after that. And that's indisputably true. Like, oh my God, you don't care about people dying. It's like, there's no situation where Sherrod Brown, who's a senator from Ohio, was just recently yelling at Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin, saying, how many workers have to die for the economy to increase by 0.5%, for GDP to increase 0.5%? And it's like, wait a minute. If GDP doesn't increase by 0.5%, how many people are going to die? How many people are going to die when you can't get food? How many people are going to die because they can't get to the doctor because they have a heart attack, or they can't get to the dentist to get an infection? So this kind of premise of either or, that either, it's coronavirus or nothing, is really fallacious, but somewhat common in our discourse. Thankfully, social media is allowing us to call people on their bullshit.
All right. So, okay. But so
what does that have to do with anarchy? Where does your anarchy come in?
I don't think this is an anarchy, non-anarchy situation. That's my point. When you're dealing with an emergency, right? If you're in a lifeboat, you don't raise your hand. You're like, all right, who's voting for Trump? Who's voting for Hillary Clinton? You're worried about how do we get food and how do we get to an island? So any kind of emergency situation such as this one, the ideology is not a concern. The issue is how do we get out of this back to some semblance of normalcy?
But do you think that this emergency is the same wherever we go? Like Sweden is different than New York, even state to state. Like for us, for New York, gotta be different than others, right?
Right, but that's all data driven, and that's about numbers, and it's not about, what do you think is the real true nature of the state, and should businesses be allowed to not pay the minimum wage?
Right. So I'm trying to find out from you what you think ought to be the.
I don't think
how this should be handled.
I think this is entirely data driven. I don't think I have any particular insight on this issue. I think it's kind of insane to think that a locality that is high population density like New York City should be treated the same as Wyoming. What was his name? Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor for Bill Clinton, was flipping out that we don't have a federal policy. It would be absurd to have a federal policy, to have New York City be the same as even upstate New York, let alone Louisiana. And I think we've seen very, very much how different leaders from different countries have all been comparing notes. They all have the same goal. There's not really a disagreement here. And I don't think that, I think I'm also against the idea that everyone needs to have kind of an opinion or perspective, because I don't think most of us are privy to much of the information, which is also extremely dynamic.
So if the data were to indicate that everybody should wear masks, you would not resist that based on your anarchist beliefs or stuff like that?
Anarchism isn't just like if the law says something to do, then you don't do it. If the law says drive the speed limit, you're not going to speed to spite them. The law is morally irrelevant in that situation.
But so you believe we don't need the law?
No, I believe the law is illegitimate.
Illegitimate.
Yes.
So how would we enforce people wearing masks? Just by people doing it for their own social?
Number one, then we have it the same way it's being enforced right now. If you go to any store in New York right now, there will be a sign on the window, often in poor English. I live near Delhi, that says, do not come in here if you're not wearing a mask. And in fact, as with AIDS, you should assume whoever you're interacting with has the disease and take precautious measures accordingly. Having a law is not going to keep you safe from a virus, which is not really have any kind of ideology of its own.
So are you anti-vax?
No.
that's the law.
Yeah, I mean that is I mean the way you would have that is that you're not allowed to go into my school unless your kid is vaccinated. So yeah, sure. If you don't want to vaccinate your,
What about on the streets and restaurants?
then you would have private streets and private restaurants. Sure, you would have whatever principles you want. That freedom of association.
Well, that sounds like the law to me, but all right.
It's not the law. No, it's not the law. Here's why. You own a nightclub, right? Comedy clubs. You could have whatever criterion you want to allow people to come in. Same thing with the nightclub next door. It doesn't have to be the New York City law. It could be if you want to have people who are underage there and you don't serve alcohol or someone, whatever, it would be up to you as the owner. That's what it means. It means your rights. It means that Cuomo or de Blasio isn't telling you how to run your nightclub, and it will succeed or fail accordingly.
Yeah, but
is it practically speaking, is there some scenario that you're describing where innocent people wouldn't end up dying because other people chose not to get vaccinated?
There is no scenario under any system where innocent people aren't dying.
Right. But
hold on. We're seeing that right here with this virus. Whatever country you're in, whether it's the US, whether it's communist China, North Korea, innocent people are dying. I mean, in fact, I would say no one who's died of the virus is guilty or deserve to die from the virus.
And not to mention another point.
No, hold on. I understand that, but I still don't understand why. I still don't understand the argument.
I'm not arguing anarchism here.
Let's give a different example.
Okay.
To build a building, you have to have certain safety codes.
Sure.
And it's illegal to build a building if you don't meet the safety codes.
Sure.
If everybody could choose their own safety codes.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a viable?
Yeah, it is, and here's how you know it is. Kosher food. Kosher food is not the law. Those standards are much higher. Halal food, I'll speak your language.
Thank you.
I want to keep it, something for everybody. I got you, fam. Those Hebrew National is a brand of hot dogs, and they say we answer to a higher authority, correct? So the premise is you would have these agencies which certify that buildings are unsafe. And if you want to rent or you want to be a developer, you would have to pass that independent inspection, which would be cheaper and more effective. And again, this has already happened with regards to food. People who keep kosher food have a much higher standard than the FDA. It has to really pass rigorous results. So they look for those buttons that are on those labels of their own free will. And this is an example of anarchist licensing.
And there'll be no government agency which inspected the private agency inspections to make sure that they didn't just.
And we see this on eBay. Correct. And we see this on eBay as well. Every single individual on eBay has to pass the reputation of everyone else that he's dealt with. And it's a very good mechanism. And eBay kicks people off. It'd be a very good mechanism for determining through proof of action. And it's a lot easier, by the way, to bribe the government as we've seen, than it is to bribe some independent inspectors. I mean, there's been no shortage of, these inspectors being paid off historically, especially in more authoritarian countries.
And finally, no police force.
No, you would have private police. You'd have more police. So the argument against having government police is the same argument as having a single payer healthcare. The idea that if something has to be provided universally, it has to be provided only through the state, leads to very bad consequences, especially for poor people.
Would the private police have to obey civil rights, the Constitution?
The Constitution is useless.
So the private police can what would restrict them from doing whatever they want?
The market, there's nothing that restricts police currently. We have videotapes of police shooting people and not even going to jail or losing their jobs.
Yes.
Let me finish my point. If I'm right now a chef, right, and I accidentally undercook a chicken and someone dies, the idea that the next day I should go to work, even if I was completely innocent, it was a mistake, is an absurdity. Yet we have a system of government monopoly where if I'm a police officer and my actions result, even innocently, in a person dying, I will have virtually no consequences for my action. That is what happens when you have a government monopoly on any service or product. People will die and there's no possibility of repercussions, especially in a city with a one-party ruling.
Well, Kai, I want to ask a question just because it's a total side note, but because I've always wondered about this, anti-vaxxers. If kids that aren't vaccinated aren't allowed in schools, why is that? Because the other kids have been vaccinated. There's already a herd immunity. What's the difference if a few kids aren't vaccinated?
I don't know. This isn't my issue.
Oh, okay.
Noam, that's a good question for Noam, though.
What's the question, Tony?
What's the difference if somebody sends their kids to school who hasn't been vaccinated if 90% of the kids have been vaccinated? You already have the herd immunity.
I don't think there is there is a difference, but I think it's at some point it catches up with you. I don't know the details, but I know that sooner or later, when vaccinations become go to a certain low level, all of a sudden it starts to spread. There's a certain age before people get their vaccinations, which I guess they're vulnerable. So you want to reduce it there. And then there's always a certain number of people where the vaccinations wane over time and they're vulnerable. So I think at some point, if a virus gets to a certain level due to the decreasing herd immunity, then all of a sudden people start getting sick. That's my feeling for it. I don't know.
We have data. You're correct, because we've seen this in Hasidic communities. Some Hasidic communities have refused to vaccinate, and they've been having outbreaks of things like measles. And because these communities are very insular and physically close to one another, you have big families. It becomes really bad really fast. And what the diseases these things are vaccinating about isn't like a cold or sniffles or your cuticles. These are often life-threatening diseases. The measles and whooping cough and mumps, these are no joke. They can have severe consequences, especially for elderly people. Things like chickenpox and things like that.
So, I got a couple.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'm just not. So this. I mean, listen. I have some anarchist sympathies, but I don't feel like calling it private police and having no accountability is better.
No one said no accountability.
Well, the accountability to the marketplace. There's no.
Private police means accountability to the marketplace. Yeah.
Right. That's what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. But what I'm saying is that if you would have no rights that were enshrined somewhere where that you could have a cause of action, if somebody violated your rights, then you would just hope in the future it would spread through the marketplace and other people wouldn't use this private police force or something, but I would have no recourse.
That's not true.
Well, what would my recourse be?
Sure.
To the law.
Same thing if you would have private arbitration, which would be cheaper and more efficient. I don't know if you're a club owner. I don't know if you've ever been involved in a lawsuit. I hope you haven't. But there's no situation. I mean, this is one of the big, bizarre arguments of minarchy. There's no service that is of less use to poor people or unempowered people than the law courts.
What do you mean private arbitration? What if I don't want to be bound to arbitration?
Let me finish my point. If you want to hire a lawyer, it's more expensive than hiring a surgeon. So the idea that if you have what we have now, and this is something that will be of use to everyone, is simply untrue. Now, what you're saying is, what if I don't want to be involved in private arbitration? Well, then your home or your street or whatever businesses are going to have, just like now, what if I don't want to listen to the law? There are going to, and I just want to be raping people, but I got away with it. Like, look at OJ, right? There are going to have to be, in any scenario, whether you're dealing with anarchism or full-blown communism, social consequences and social implications for norms being implemented and enforced. That there's no workaround around this, no matter what your perspective on the law is.
So what do you do if somebody murders somebody?
You put them in jail or you kill them.
Put them in private jail?
Okay. Sure, private jail, or you kick them out of their home and you exile them. I mean, I don't know. The thing is, you don't know how the market is going to resolve these issues. But it'd certainly be cheaper, more efficient, and more innovative than it is now, where you don't put them into the White House,
The point of fact, though, OJ was a murderer, not a rapist.
That's not every murderer is. I had a friend who worked for the Innocence Project, which is a great organization which uses DNA tests to exonerate people who have been falsely imprisoned for having crimes of murder and things like that. And I suggested to him that their slogan should be "Not every rapist is a murderer," and he did not think that was a good idea.
Norm is very involved with the Project Innocent.
I'm not very involved with them. I raised some money for them. I raised some money.
It's a great. I mean, this is exactly speaks to what I'm talking about. When you have a monopoly on enforcement of justice, it is very, very, very hard to have any kind of accountability. And as a result of this, especially poor people are the ones who are going to be the most vulnerable and getting hurt. There's an old expression that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. And the follow-up to that is a liberal is a conservative who's been arrested. Because I hope none of us ever have to deal with the police or the state as a target, because the consequences are not going to be fun in the best case.
I have to tell you, despite the polished answers, I think it makes no sense. If I murder somebody, I don't know which private organization is going to decide to arrest me.
I'm glad you think my answers are polished when they're being impromptu. That is a real testament to my speaking. I'm not joking in the slightest. Now, your question is who's going to arrest you? That's like asking, all right, who will build the roads? or who is going to build the restaurants.
Yeah.
The point is, whenever there is any need, especially a need as extremely urgent as safety, let me give you another example to kind of.
But just let me. I'm gonna let you answer because you kind of interrupted me. Just say, so you're not gonna know who's gonna arrest you. What if there's an overlap? What if two different private groups think that they have the right to arrest you? What if in the trial?
How many questions are you gonna get me?
No, I'm giving it a whole. You can answer.
I'll give you them all.
Anyway. It's not all one question. I mean, it's not individual questions. It's like
There's a lot of question marks in there.
I'm presenting a general kind of vibe.
Okay.
Which is the kind of anarchy of anarchy, which is that one hand won't know what the other hand is doing. There'll be conflicts. There will be mockeries of justices.
Unlike now?
Travesties of justice.
Unlike now?
Not unlike now, but orders of magnitude, more of them, and with no recourse, and one man's travesty of justice will be another man's fair trial, because each private organization, just like different countries now, have drastically different codes of justice,
which is an asset.
Right,
So,
within 5 city blocks, you could have Sharia law and
hey, he's speaking your language.
And if I happen to hit somebody by accident in a car on the Sharia block, now all of a sudden I can go to jail or get my hands chopped off, and another block I might be set free. It's just
so. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Let's suppose that is the case. Yeah. You think that the market, and by market I mean you and all of us, if there is a road where there's a possibility, if I drive down it, I'm going to get killed. They have that now. There's neighborhoods where if you go down this road, you're going to get killed. You're saying that, well, too bad. I guess I got to take this road. I'm not going to detour this thing, number one. Number two is you're also describing it's very funny when the arguments against anarchism, the worst arguments are in fact descriptions of the status quo, as in no recourse. What happens if a American kills a Canadian in Mexico? I have no idea. However, I am certain that there is a mechanism in place ahead of time to ensure that this is resolved. Same thing with if I'm on Sprint and you're on AT&T and I call you, who's paying? I don't know. I'm sure you don't know. We don't need to know. These organizations figure things out ahead of time because it is extremely expensive for them to have customers having to worry about these things. One of the things we're taught at public schools since we're children is the lie that under democracy, everyone has to know everything and have an opinion on everything. That is completely untrue, and most people do not have the capacity or time to have an opinion on everything. So yes, it is true that within one block, you would have 5 different agencies. The point is, we have that right now. You have the city police, you have New York State, and you have the federal government. So what you're arguing against is in fact the status quo, and the claim that it would be orders of magnitude more difficult. If you look at things like food, if you look at things like fashion, the problem would be having so many choices as opposed to having no access to justice or liberty, which again, if you want to have, let me finish, if you want to have access to justice now under our current system, any scenario where it's not a nightmare is simply absurd.
Okay, so I know correlation is not causation, and I can't prove it, but I think most people believe that having the rule of law is a big part of why capitalist economies have succeeded so well, and and to the extent that countries don't have rule of law or are corrupt, they don't succeed that well. And what you're suggesting is, as I see it, no actual dispute resolution, because even if 2 people agree to arbitration,
You didn't say that.
yes, because even if two people agree to arbitration, and I fuck Tony over in a contract, and he wants to arbitrate. And even if I go to the arbitration and the arbitrator rules in Tony's favor, I'm like, well, tough shit, I'm not paying you anyway.
But the bank will be part of this arbitration organization. Every organization is going to have some kind of seal that they're working with these others. And let's look at right now. Hold on.
Is the arbitration good?
Hold on a second. We don't know how the market's going to solve these issues, but we have the issue happening right now. If you and Tony have a dispute over eBay, and someone screws over something, eBay has had many different policies over the time. You don't have to go to some office. eBay is making that decision for you. And if you don't like it, or if I don't like it, I can move on and not use their platform. It would be the same exact scenario. Now, if you're dealing with things like violence, let us make that comparison. If you compare the places that are under the purview of the government that you like so much, things like public parks, things like alleys, any space that is under government purview, the subways, are specifically the places where you are most likely to be the victim of violence without consequences. Meanwhile, Places like bars full of young, drunken, aggressive males. Places like hotels, where everyone by definition is not local to the area you're in, are infinitely safer. Why? Because they are under the purview of private security and those of their owners. So what we have is data that demonstrates that your claim that if government is in charge of providing security, in fact, the exact opposite happens. And let's not even talk about government housing projects and what it's like for people stuck in them and how safe they feel.
I'm saying that, and I'm saying that if there's a dispute, you have to have a dispute resolution mechanism, and at some point it has to be enforced by somebody with the authority of, coercive authority.
I just gave you a demonstration of the contrary.
But you have a go-to kind of thing here, which is that you point to some example of how eBay, how it could work. But
it's how it does work. This isn't a fantasy.
But there's no reason to think because eBay is an example of what you're talking about, that therefore that is a proof that this works. It works on eBay. Now eBay is quite successful. And what happens if eBay tomorrow says, you know what? We're not going to let black people sell on eBay anymore.
Okay, what would happen? You don't know how this would work out? Really? This is an unanswerable fantasy to you?
I'm not convinced anything would happen except black people will be shit out of luck.
Wait, you're telling me... Wait, you're telling me with a straight face that if a company right now in America says we're not going to work with black people, they're going to have no consequences? Really? Put that sign up in your club and see what happens.
They'll have some consequences, but I don't know. It's quite unpredictable what the consequences.
It's quite predictable, I assure you.
How does your system work when one person owns everything? Like pretty much Amazon is on its way to owning everything.
What's Amazon's net worth and what's the GDP?
Well, I don't know.
It must be 0.1%.
Well, you just broke up there. I know what you said.
I said, how much is Amazon's net worth and what's the GDP? Amazon is probably 0.1%, if that, of the economy.
I know, but right now, Jeffrey Bezos is on track to be a trillionaire because of this crisis. So now he owns pretty much anytime anybody buys anything or watches anything, Amazon is pretty much involved now, whether it's groceries or a movie. So
you think it's a problem that poor people have access to food without having to leave their house at the cheapest rates in history?
No, well, I don't know about the cheapest rates in history, but
I do know.
I like that the gas prices are down.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, Jeff Bezos being a trillionaire has had no impact on any of our.
I love Amazon. I love Amazon.
Wait, hold on. Let me ask you this, Noam. You're telling me if Jeff Bezos says tomorrow that before you buy an Amazon, you have to have your picture and you have to be lighter than a paper bag, that there would be no consequences and we can't predict what would happen?
No, I think that your point is well taken. When I say black people shit out of luck, I agree there would be consequences, but I do think that depending on the economics involved, you could have the output of bigoted mentalities be that certain groups were at a disadvantage to do commerce as opposed to other groups and I think that people would begin to get used to it. And then the reactions that you would expect in 2020 America may not be the reactions you get 30 years from now when the Jews, when Israel does something terrible and some company wants to say, well, we don't need Israelis on eBay right now because they give their profits to their families in Israel. And I don't know if there will be enough people who would care about that. And I think at some point, and again, I don't reject everything you're saying. I lean in that direction. I just think when you take it to that extreme that you don't need some last recourse of a constitution and a Bill of Rights and some sort of enforceability, I think that's wrong. But
you're arguing for world government then. Because you're arguing for world government, because right now every country on earth is in a state of anarchism toward each other. So if you don't like what the federal government is doing, you're going to call the UN?
No.
Well, the UN doesn't do anything.
We have to have elections.
No, but my point is, why does the buck have to stop with the country? I mean, if you're as opposed to on your city block.
Yeah, I want to say one thing.
There's different ways to organize it. I'm just saying at some point at some point you need an enforcer.
Where are you determining where that point should be, though, is my question.
Well, that's why I say I'm sympathetic. I'm ready to move that point towards the private sector. I'm just not ready to move it all the way to zero government, such that if I get murdered, I have to try to navigate some private group of organizations to
But
get
that's the-
justice who may not even care about me. And then even if I get a verdict, they may not have the authority to even punish the murderer.
But
I mean,
you're
that's-
describing the status quo. Like
No,
if you do get, first off, you get murdered, you don't care. You're done. That's number one.
My child
But right now, right, God forbid. But if that happens right now,
It
you
is-
still
yeah.
there's no scenario where if someone is murdered, it's not a nightmare getting consequences for
Yeah.
them.
I want to say one point, and
For
then
rich white people? Go ahead.
and I think we should move on because there's a lot I want to talk to Mike about. We had a policing expert here before, Norm, if you remember, and we were talking about the racism between and the crimes between the black community and the Jewish community in the same neighborhood, and we said that the solution was the neighborhood police, where like one Jewish, one black together, and that's and I think it would work. Same thing in a
Bunny
black
movie.
neighborhood. Black neighborhood, if you have black cops or black private security, it will be better. So that part, I really go for.
I'm going to just jump on something you said, Noam, because I think you'd make a good criticism. What you're talking about, if you talk about accountability, it's not just the market. If you have multiple police agencies, they're going to be holding each other accountable. Businesses hold each other accountable. So if you did have a police agency that was letting people get murdered, you better believe that their rivals, thankfully, would be going to the press immediately, being like, look what the hell's going on. And this would be something that all of us would be of enormous interest in, including now, when the police misbehave and people are, even if they're kind of not innocent, are still needlessly murdered. This is of extreme interest to everyone. And I don't foresee any scenario between where we are and full, totalitarianism, where people getting murdered without consequence isn't of enormous interest, because this speaks to very basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the security of a person.
So let me ask you this question, last one,
Sure.
because I think this is a better way of illustrating the point I was making before. If you believe in anarchy, you don't just believe anarchy as I don't put words in your mouth. I don't believe that you believe in anarchy wedded to 2020. In other words,
I do.
you don't believe this would have been a good system in 1850, do you?
I think technology is a very key component to making anarchy feasible. And let me give you an example of how that works. If you and I were having an argument in 1990, right? I have this example in my book, and we're talking about censorship, right? And I'm saying we need full freedom of speech, and you're saying, oh, that's crazy. We need to have some censorship. What about child pornography? What about books like Mein Kampf, that have been used for historically evil purposes, right? And then Time Traveler appears in 2020 and says, you guys are both wasting your time, because right now I can, with one button, make infinite copies of a book and send it anywhere on earth at the speed of light for free to anyone I want. And I can have a magic word on this book, so only the people I want can open it. That solves the issue of censorship, and it becomes completely secondary. So yeah, one of the problems against anarchism is that we can't move anywhere on earth at the speed of light. But once you have the ability to go from different places, the rule of law having between two oceans very quickly falls away as a mechanism of enforcement. And
Michael,
this is an example.
That's a good answer. But do you not understand that there are certain neighborhoods that right now, if the businesses could say, listen, based on crime rates, we don't want to let any blacks in here.
Okay, yeah.
They would do that.
Okay.
Whole neighborhoods would, and they would and they would get away with it. That would be
They are doing that.
They are doing that.
right. But they're doing it with at risk, and there's recourse. I'm saying that it would be open season, and I just that alone, I would like to hear a better answer
I
for
don't see
that.
the
But go ahead.
difference.
Go ahead, Dan.
I haven't spoken in a while, so
Yeah.
Of course.
I don't really see the difference between what you're suggesting. You're suggesting the private sector and from neighborhood to neighborhood, or people decide on their own. Isn't that what a country is? It's a neighborhood, albeit a big one, of people that have decided this is how we're going to do it. Now, of course, it could be neighborhood to neighborhood. We're doing it. We do it country to country. It could be done, smaller or great. You've brought the possibility of a world government. But what is a country but a neighborhood of people that have decided privately, this is how we're going to do things. And
They haven't decided. They
These
were
are the
forced
rules.
to.
We have
Okay, so
elections.
this is where I disagree with you. I don't think I think it would be insane for me to have my accountant be my dentist, right? So the claim that once a year I have to flick a switch and the person who represents me for abortion is the person who represents me for taxation, who represents me for environmentalism, who represents me for international affairs, has to be the same person. And if the person I voted against is more popular, I'm SOL and they speak for me. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. I should be able to choose who represents me under every issue, under every circumstance, because that is what freedom means.
Yeah. All right. So let's.
What about can I just say, what about currency very quickly? Is there any role for government in currency?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, the role for government currency is to screw over poor people through inflation. And make the dollar's value decrease every year by running the printing press. Having something like a Bitcoin or having a currency based on a precious metal which cannot be inflated, is the great. I mean, surely you understand. I'm not trying to be glib, but I mean, when government is in control of currency, you have these nightmarish inflationary regimes where look, Venezuela is a great extreme example here, where everyone becomes destitute because the currency becomes worthless. It is only a government which can force people to use their currency, which can effectively make that currency have no value.
Okay, thank you.
Bitcoin,
I think that's a great point. I think
that's a great point. Pandemic.
All right, so let's move on. I want to ask you guys about Trump's.
I'm sorry. So what you're saying is that Israel can stay in the West Bank. Go ahead, Hatem.
Yes. we shall see.
But they have to crowd together. That's all we're saying.
Fine. So the rush is churches and worship places an essential place, like Trump say. What's your thought on that?
What was the question?
Churches and worship places.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Are they essential, like Trump was saying yesterday, and he want to reopen? I mean, obviously, it's election.
Depends how you define essential, I suppose. But for some people, they're a source of great comfort, even though I don't believe in it. But for people for whom that's very important, I would imagine it's a great psychological comfort.
But if
Tony needs his Asian massages back.
If the Vatican said,
"Don't be racist," I'm not racist. She doesn't have to be Asian.
Oh, that's nice.
But no, it would not be. It were up to me. I would not. Well, that gets into just how dangerous at this point. If everybody wears masks in the church, can it be done safely? That's another issue.
What do you mean safely? Like for the virus? You mean?
For the virus?
Yeah, but I mean, you can't control the numbers.
I'm just saying nothing really is. I mean, very few things are essential. So I would say no, it's not essential. But
well, you know what though? A church isn't gonna be any more crowded than a supermarket. So what's the what if people feel like they want to go to a church or a synagogue?
Are they gonna limit you to praise per? You can ask God for one thing. That's it. One item.
Well, I'm an atheist, so I encourage it. I encourage the behavior, but But you go to the supermarket, you can't social distance in the supermarket. So what's the difference?
Sure. So Michael, you talked before about how the media always manipulate us in other interview, and Trump called it the fake news and all that. I just want to take your take back on media right now.
The corporate press is the enemy of the people. Yeah. So one of the things I discuss in my book is that we are taught in school that about yellow journalism and how the corporate press got us into the Spanish-American War and all this other stuff. Then there's a record scratch and all of a sudden they're supposed to be objective. These people have been the same villains for at least 100 years in this country. There's nothing wrong with having a bias to your point of view. Everyone's going to have one. There's difference between having an agenda. One of the more extremes is, of course, their constant browbeating and incessant push for war. If they had their druthers, we currently would be in Syria right now. Remember the Kurds? They were going to have another genocide. And if we don't go in there tomorrow, they're all going to be killed. So the Holocaust was Hitler. It's funny. Trump is both Hitler for not going to Syria, and then he'd be Hitler for going into Syria. How many genocides does his name? As soon as that didn't work, we don't hear about them. It's amazing. If we struck that guy in Iran, it was going to be World War III tomorrow. Remember this? This was January. No one who said this had any consequences. And just this week, the New York Times had an article about how Iran is de-escalating tensions with the United States. So I think these people are very evil. They're very dangerous. I think increasingly there's an enormous amount of contempt correctly towards the agencies as a group and towards the members individually. I have a thread that I have on Twitter, which I'm sure people can find very easily, which talks about Walter Duranty, who was the New York Times man in Russia during the 30s. And he went out of his way to say that these claims that there's a genocide in Ukraine are a lie, that the people are fine, that this is just anti-communist propaganda. The guy won a Pulitzer. So this has been, and there's not been this kind of like, and now the New York Times will have articles about how women got laid more under socialism, and happy birthday, Karl Marx. So there's never this sense of, we really bungled it in the 30s. Let's really be careful now. So, I mean, the amount of contempt, the battle is won when the average American views a corporate journalist exactly as they view a tobacco executive.
Well, to be fair, Trump did write the president of Turkey a pretty tough letter. Let me ask you this. If Pearl Harbor or something like that happens and the United States is attacked, the private military goes to fight?
When Pearl Harbor happened, was there a draft, or did everyone sign? Well, hold on, no. Let's talk about this example. When Pearl Harbor happened, everyone signed up the next day.
No, I understand. But will it be a private military that they sign up for?
Sure. Well, the first thing is, I don't think Pearl Harbor would happen, because Pearl Harbor happens when it's one government fighting another government. It would be very hard for Japan to declare war on Sprint or Burger King, right?
Or 11, or we're attacked for whatever reason. You can't. I mean,
you're hand waving. I'm trying to look at. The thing is, you're trying to create a scenario that doesn't port to reality, and then ask me to address reality.
Dude, come on now. I'm saying that attacks have not stopped happening between nations. If the
9/11 was not an attack between nations.
Okay, but if the apocalypse,
you're hand waving away because your examples are ridiculous.
I'm going to give you an example.
Okay.
If the religious fundamentalist regime of Iran,
okay,
with one of their drones, bombs the United States of America.
Well, there wouldn't be a United States under. I
think. And why are they doing this under your scenario?
They do it because we did something to provoke them.
Who's we? That's my point.
Somebody did something to provoke them.
Okay, so if Iran drones somebody on Earth, we have that scenario now.
Don't be a lightning rod to try to shunt.
I'm not being a lightning rod because your scenario doesn't make sense.
You're trying to shunt every bolt of electricity to Earth. What I'm saying is that at some point a scenario will come
lightning rods are good.
Where there is a
tribe,
an act of violence.
Describe it.
I'll describe it for you right now.
Then an army
invades Alaska for the oil. What happens?
An army will need to retaliate. I'm asking, will it be one private army? Will it be a competing private army?
Let's ask that question. We had that already happen, Tony, in our lifetime. But we're old men here.
What's
when Iraq invaded Kuwait, was it the Kuwaitis who responded? No, you had an entire coalition because there were very many agencies interested in making sure that borders are secured and you do not have this level of aggression, right?
True.
So a
lot of governments got together.
Sure. Yes. Hold on. Fine. My point is if your claim is that if Russia invaded Alaska right now, and let's suppose the U.S. government couldn't do anything.
Under your scenario. Not now. I'm under your scenario.
I'm going with what Noam said, right? Okay. So if right now Russia invaded Alaska, and let's suppose the U.S. military didn't exist, there would certainly be plenty of other forces, not necessarily even American, who would be enormously interested, including just agencies who are rivalrous to Russia and do not want to have Putin get more power and get more money, who will have repercussions to enact that. And we also see this with Ukraine. Putin invades Ukraine. It doesn't lead to war, but there's very many mechanisms to try to push back against an aggressor state.
And also when things went bad in Iraq, Black Waters took over, right? It's a private, yeah.
Here's the other thing. I'll tell you what I'm saying.
No,
you're not? Okay. We don't know we never know what will happen when wars happen. So the claim that, well, if this country invades another, we know how it would play out. What if, Germany, what if Pearl Harbor never happened? We don't know what would happen.
I'm asking you, so is this another way to describe your position, which is that if in the 1930s we had the internet, essentially the digital technology that we have now, Hitler could have never risen to power?
Oh, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, we have Hitler now in the White House.
How would we stop him? How would we have stopped Hitler then?
I don't know that we could have stopped Hitler as Americans. I certainly think that having technology is very useful in terms of calling people out on their bullshit, right? And it'll be also very useful for, there's a great book called Beyond Belief by Deborah Lipstadt. And she discusses the role of the American press as Hitler rose to power. And what was fascinating about it is she empathizes a great deal with them because so many of the claims that were coming out of Germany, the reporters were like, this is exaggerated. This can't be true. And the reason they were saying this also because much of the World War I propaganda had been shown to be false. If you had technology, look at Tiananmen Square. I don't think China could do Tiananmen Square right now. We have no footage of Tiananmen Square. We just have the tank man who was not killed incidentally. If you had those tanks, and look at the things at Hong Kong, there's enormous pushback when people at the press of a button anywhere on earth can see footage of these atrocities, as opposed to it being hearsay from the 30s where someone got out and you're like, oh, you're just saying that because you just want to build up drama against Germany. So technology has enormously hindered the ability of totalitarian regimes to get away with what they did. Look at who wrote about the gulags? It's Solzhenitsyn. You know, Solzhenitsyn, it was all hearsay. He didn't have proof of this. And then plenty of Western reporters would say, oh, this is propaganda. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's much harder when everyone has a video camera, where everyone can be an eyewitness, and that can be spread throughout the world at the speed of light for free.
No question it's harder. No question it's harder. And I think that anarchy, the system you're proposing, is clearly superior to totalitarian Chinese-like regime. I don't know that it's superior to a constitutional democracy like America.
But we don't have a constitutional democracy. The Constitution has been much more used to.
You know, I knew as I said it that I was getting. I said he's going to say there's no such thing as a constitution.
No, I'm just going to say let's say one sentence, please. The Constitution has been much more effectively used to explain the growth of government than to defend individual rights. You and I do not have any ability to have guns in New York City, despite the explicit law to the contrary.
Michael,
yet you can be prosecuted for hate speech in England, and you can't in America. So,
Michael, just getting back to your earlier point about law enforcement, would you be opposed to, say, the people that live in my neighborhood getting together and deciding this is who we're going to use to police crime? Would you be opposed to that?
I'd be enormously in favor of it.
Well,
Isn't that what the United States is? A group?
No, I don't recognize the authority of De Blasio. What am I going to do about it?
Let me ask you a question. You just
somebody in
said
that neighborhood might
own a
not
gun in
recognize
New
the
York.
authority of the police that we hired.
They don't have to. The police agencies have to recognize each other's authority because they're the ones making the decisions.
You just said you can't own a gun in New York.
New York City, I can't
That's
own a
not
gun.
true. Of
In
course
New
you can
York
own a
City?
gun. Yeah, of course you can own a gun. Yeah, you got to get a gun license. That's all.
I don't think you can in New York City.
Yes, of course you can. You can definitely get a gun license in New York City.
Not easily though.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
I think
But if it was a privately controlled, why would it be easier to get a gun?
Because at time, so how would they even know it's in my house? Second of all, the cost of putting your customers in jail is going to be exorbitant. And third of all, we found in most in the market, whenever there's an option, it's going to be on the error on the side of freedom as opposed to being busybodies. So, and in fact, it is of great use to having government monopoly to have the people disarmed, because then you have a need to frequent the needs of this business.
So I'm going to take it to the other side of the world now.
Okay.
Since we have Michael with us, and
the motherland.
Can I go on record as saying, despite the flaws that I see, what he's saying is not nearly as outlandish as some people might say it is.
I'm just going to build one point. It's impossible to have a radical philosophy and not sound like a lunatic or a moron at first.
Well, it's just that also for an anarchist, your CDs are amazingly well organized.
They're not. You think they're alphabetical? But
yeah, I think they are.
No. I can trick you.
Well, they're not in a pile on the floor.
That's fair. That's fair.
These are sort of an anachronism.
It's impossible to have a radical philosophy without appearing as a lunatic or a moron. However, having an outlandish a radical philosophy is not proof that you are not a lunatic or a moron.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right, so we'll take it to the. I'm very curious to ask Michael about something because
it's true. What you're saying is true.
I didn't mean it.
No, I didn't take it insulting, but a lot of people on the internet, right, will say, "Oh, you don't want to argue with me because you can't handle it." It's like, no, you're a moron and a lunatic.
Yeah,
your philosophy makes no sense. That happens all the time.
First of all, you should follow Michael on Twitter because it's so much fun. So my question is North Korea.
Yeah.
Okay, because you wrote a book about it. You lived there for a long time. You know everything about it.
Yeah.
That
a week.
A week. Okay. Well, what happened with when he disappeared? You know.
Yeah. So that's a great example. Let me get into it at some length. North Korea is obviously an extremely technical situation in a country with a very long history, and didn't happen like this overnight. Your Facebook friends don't know about North Korea, and there's no reason for them to know about North Korea. And it's very amazing where they say, "Oh, I have a suspicion that if Kim Jong-un goes away, it's going to be his sister." And then I always ask them, "Can you name one other person in North Korean leadership? Can you name his sister?" And they can't. So it's amazing how all these people. When's the last time you heard of a billionaire? Sure, he's overweight. A billionaire having access to the best doctors in the world dying on the table. This does not happen. And the stories were coming out of like Japan, why would Japan be the first to know that something happened with Kim Jong-un? So it was really funny. There's also people like, he hasn't appeared to 2 events. This is unprecedented. It's like, have you been to New York? No one's in Times Square. That's also unprecedented. These aren't normal times, you assholes. So unfortunately, and the other thing is people think, oh, well, if he goes away, it's going to be freedom. We don't know what happens when he goes away. And it's very easy to imagine a scenario where that precarious government doubles down and really escalates the oppression in that country to maintain their hold on power like they did in the 90s. So my one point with this issue is the only prism that matters when you're looking at North Korea, and you could hate Trump and you could love Trump, whatever, is what does this mean for the ongoing enslavement of the North Korean people? What does it mean for a population where children are starved for political purposes? That's the only prism you have to look at this. And everything else is just really kind of secondary.
Do you think that Trump had a chance or have a chance right now to make it better?
I'm very saddened to report through sources I have that basically North Korea has fallen by the wayside. There seemed to be some progress being made, at the very least, in holding their feet to the fire internationally in consequence of their concentration camps, which they still have right now, 100, 200,000 people in these camps. The levels of oppression are unlike anything else in the world. And there seemed to be some sort of liberalization possibly on the horizon. And now they just kind of dropped the issue, and that's very discouraging.
But Trump did know that he was okay.
Yeah. So the CNN reporter said that he had heard from 2 sources. I don't think he would have made that up out of nowhere. One theory is that this was their attempt to figure out who the leaks are. That's a very good mechanism for these regimes or for the State Department. You tell different people different stories and see which ones ends up in the press, and that's how you know who has their fingers over the button. The other thing I want to make clear is people have this bizarre idea that if Kim Jong-un vanished, things would just be allowed to play out naturally. There's no doubt, there's like zero possibility that there isn't a plan in place between the U.S., China, Japan, South Korea, possibly Russia, which has a small border with North Korea. They have nukes. There's a plan in place to make sure this is stabilized if things collapse. They're not just going to let it be like, oh, well, whatever. I don't know what that would look like, but I'm sure that people do know.
Has there ever been a bunch of private agencies aren't going to be competing for those nukes? But go ahead.
Has ever been a society
so sure.
that worked? Even when people were in tribes and hunter gatherers, those tribes had rules within the tribe that everybody was subject to. Has there ever been an anarchic society that has been that has worked?
Right now, this is all of us right now are currently in a state of anarchy towards one another. There's no possibility we're going to be calling any kind of higher authority. We're engaging peacefully in exchange. If I buy a sweater from Macy's, there are ways I can return it if I don't like it. There's ways I don't, but there's no government involvement whatsoever.
You're not going to like it.
Hold on. The claim that we need the government there is like saying if we didn't have all these exorcists, we'd all be possessed. There's not any realistic possibility of getting any kind of state involvement involved in the vast majority of interhuman disputes. And in fact, the state is the biggest mechanism for introducing disputes into interhuman relationships by forcing people to interact who otherwise would not want to or have to.